Ans canangri dea, ens canangri dea braie. Labra stompre frepefi egite oreci.
Right now, in churches all across the globe, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of preachers claiming that talking in tongues is the language of God and that it's the ultimate spiritual connection. But that is an outright lie. And here's why. When you strip away the music and the bright lights, you find a much darker reality. What these preachers are actually doing is opening a door to the abyss. Think about what happens during the height of these intense talking in tongues revival services. Whether it's the preacher or the congregation talking in tongues, what's actually happening is that the person's logical thinking completely shuts down. The person's conscious will, their identity, and their internal gatekeeper vanish, and they enter a state of complete mental blackout. For decades, pastors, priests, and televangelists have told you that this cognitive blackout is a heavenly language. They are lying to you. When you strip away the ambient lighting, the repetitive guitar chords, and the emotional hype, you don't find a holy ritual. What you do find is a highly sophisticated, hypnotic frequency designed to shatter the congregational's biological defences. In this podcast, we're uncovering the terrifying reality the modern church refuses to face, how an ancient, demonic acoustic signature is hijacking Christian altars, bypassing human intellect, and transforming believers into spiritual vessels for something completely unholy. But before we dive deeper into talking in tongues, we need to look at the true origin of this phenomenon. We have to look past the modern church and travel back thousands of years to the plains of Shinar, to the Tower of Babel. The book of Genesis, chapter 11, records that humanity originally spoke a single language. Driven by pride, they attempted to build a massive tower to breach the heavens and seize divine power. Genesis chapter 11, verse 7 reveals God's direct intervention, where he said, "Come, let us go down and therefore confuse their language, so they will not understand each other." Verse 9 explicitly states that the location was named Babel, because that's where the Lord confused the language of all the earth. While modern preachers claim that ecstatic Babel began as a holy gift at Pentecost, a deeper scriptural analysis reveals a terrifying inversion. The original manifestation of altered, unintelligible tongues wasn't a blessing at all. It was a divine curse meant to scatter and break humanity. By treating this fractured, chaotic speech as a supreme spiritual connection, today's ministries aren't channeling a heavenly ritual. They're resurrecting the ancient rebellious frequency of Babel, inviting the exact same confusion and spiritual blindness back onto the modern altar. And this ancient curse of confusion is exactly what today's mega ministries have weaponized into a global money-making machine. By taking the chaotic, fractured speech of Babel and rebranding it as a holy prayer language, televangelist movements like the charismatic prosperity preachers and word of faith teachers have pulled off the ultimate spiritual bait and switch. They tell you that mental confusion, that is, talking in tongues, is a sign of divine favour, effectively shutting down your logical brain. Once your critical thinking is completely blacked out by this hypnotic babble, your defences are gone, making you the perfect target for their next high-pressure donation pitch to fund their private jets and luxury lifestyles. When you strip away the theatrical hype, the truth is undeniable. Modern talking in tongues is entirely fake. It is nothing more than psychobabble, a random, meaningless string of sounds with zero linguistic structure, zero divine backing, and absolutely no supernatural power. It holds no authority over the spiritual realm, and it holds no holy blessing for your life. It is a completely empty, self-induced psychological loop that carries no more spiritual weight than a child babbling in a playground. Let's look at the hard neuroscientific data. Brain scans prove that when someone is talking in tongues, the brain's prefrontal cortex completely shuts down. The prefrontal cortex is the seat of your conscious will, your logic, and your identity. In psychology, this is called profound dissociation. In spiritual warfare, it's called lowering your shields. God designed the human mind with a gatekeeper, your conscious awareness. When you intentionally destroy that gatekeeper through repetitive chanting, hyperventilation, musical hypnosis, or herd mentality, you leave the door wide open. You're handing the steering wheel of your biology over to an unknown driver. This isn't an accident. And the Apostle Peter explicitly warned us about this mental state in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8, saying, "Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour." When you shut down your prefrontal cortex, you're no longer sober. You're no longer vigilant. You have abandoned the watchtower. And here's a fact that modern churches love to ignore. Talking in tongues is not uniquely Christian. What most people don't know is that talking in tongues is also found in African voodoo ceremonies and ancient Tibetan oracle rituals. It's also found in the ecstatic cults of Dionysus in ancient Rome. The ecstatic cults of Dionysus, known to the Romans as Bacchus, were ancient mystery schools centred around ritual madness, heavy intoxication, and sensory overload to achieve a state of divine possession. Worshippers, particularly women called Maenads or Bacchantes, would retreat into the mountains or hidden sanctuaries to dance to rhythmic drumming, hyperventilate, drink wine, and enter uncontrollable trances. They believed that by shutting down their ego and rational minds, the god would physically enter their bodies, granting them supernatural ecstasy. In 186 BCE, the Roman Senate actually banned these wild bacchanalia festivals because the states of mental blackout, screaming, and chaotic trances were seen as a threat to public order and national security. And so we know demonic entities don't have original ideas. They only have counterfeits. And while talking in tongues was originally a curse of the people of Babel, the true biblical gift of tongues in the book of Acts was a real, translatable human language used to spread the truth to these new foreign nations born out of Babel. But what we see today is a chaotic, non-linguistic frequency. It's the language of Babel. It's a tool used by ancient pagan spirits to bind minds, bypass human intellect, and establish a spiritual foothold. Christ himself explicitly warned against this in Matthew chapter 6, verse 7. And when you pray, do not use vain repetitions as the heathen do, for they think that they will be heard for their many words. The enemy demands your trance. He wants you to chant until your mind breaks, creating a doorway for ancient pagan spirits to bind your intellect and establish a spiritual foothold. When you actually listen to modern talking in tongues, not with emotional hype, but with objective ears, the sound reveals its true nature. It doesn't sound like a language, it sounds like an acoustic loop. Linguists who study this phenomenon have proven that these sounds lack syntax, grammar, or true vocabulary. Instead, you hear the same 4 or 5 phonetic sounds repeated like a malfunctioning machine. It's a stammering, clicking, rapid-fire drone, and it usually sounds something like Shanda Baba Loku Tu Shanda. This is the literal sound of Babel. In Genesis 11, God didn't give humanity beautiful new cultures. He fractured their speech as a judgment. He reduced their unified language into a chaotic, fragmented noise to break their pride. When you hear this repetitive, non-linguistic stuttering in churches today, you aren't hearing an actual language. You're hearing the raw acoustic signature of that ancient judgment. It's a fragmented frequency designed to strip away intelligence and leave the human mind in a state of primal, animalistic confusion. So why is this happening inside the church? Because we're living in the age of the Great Deception. Many modern leaders are not steering the sheep, they're leading the sheep into a spiritual trap. They use repetitive chord progressions, manipulative atmospheric lighting, and high-pressure social dynamics to force people into a state of hyper-suggestibility. The Bible tells us exactly how to spot this church-level deception. Look at 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 33. For God is not the author of confusion, but of peace. And later, in verse 40, Paul commands, let all things be done decently and in order. If a spiritual practice requires mass chaos, screaming, rolling on the floor, and people losing total control of their faculties, it's not from God. It is a counterfeit fire designed to make believers comfortable with spiritual manipulation. But this deception isn't confined to wild, emotional revival tents. It's crawled its way into the highest, most traditional altars of liturgy across multiple denominations. When an ordained priest, someone trusted with the spiritual care of a flock, stands before an altar and begins to stammer in dark, unstructured glossolia, that is, talking in tongues, a dangerous line is crossed. In occult history, the priest was always the medium. The pagan priest of Apollo at Delphi spoke in unintelligible tongues while possessed by a spirit called Python. When an ordained priest or minister mimics this pagan mediumship, they're not acting under the authority of Christ. They are invoking the ancient priesthood of the occult. They're acting as a conduit, inviting unclean spirits straight into the sanctuary, validating a demonic frequency to the trusting believers sitting in the pews. If talking in tongues were truly divine, the fruit would be peace, clarity, and a sound mind. But look closer at the aftermath of these ecstatic environments. Many believers leave these experiences dealing with severe spiritual oppression. They report sudden, unexplained anxiety, terrifying night terrors, and a persistent cloud of mental confusion. Why? Because they participated in a ritual of vacancy. When you tell your mind to become blank, you're inviting entity attachment. The Bible explicitly warns against vain repetitions and prayers without understanding. God speaks to your intellect. The enemy demands your trance. Jesus gave us a terrifying warning about this exact state of emptiness in Matthew chapter 12, verses 43 to 45. He explained that when an unclean spirit goes out of a man, it walks through dry places seeking rest. If it returns and finds the house empty, swept, and put in order, it goes and takes with it 7 other spirits more wicked than itself. They enter and dwell there, and the last state of that man is worse than the first. When you empty your mind to speak in tongues, you're sweeping the house clean, turning off the lights, and inviting entity attachment. Your mind is a fortress. Your willpower is the lock. Never let music, a song, a crowd, or a preacher convince you to hand over the keys to your own consciousness. True spiritual power doesn't require you to lose control. It requires you to be fully awake. And the scripture says, God gives us a sound mind, not a hollow one. And this is why talking in tongues is demonic, and it's on you to test the spirits and hold fast to 1 John chapter 4, verse 1. Do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they're from God, for many false prophets have gone out into the world. Protect your thoughts, question the fire, unmask the deception. Stay sober, stay vigilant, and I'll see you in my next podcast.